There's the record button. Here is my maximize button. Here is my share button. And now you should be able to see this. So today we're going to just be doing, we're going to look at dividing decimals. Now, if you recall, so you know what, maybe I'll write this off to the right here. When you multiply decimals, which is what we did last week, step one, you multiply. Step two, you place your decimal. Okay, and there's a way to do that. All right. The opposite of division, the opposite of multiplication is division. So our steps are going to go the exact opposite. In other words, when you divide decimals, you're going to place the decimal first, and then you're going to divide. Okay? So if you could just remember that, it's really easy. Like, dividing decimals, super easy. People make it more difficult than what it has to be, and it's because they just forget the technique. So here's what we're looking at. I'm going to go over some words. This is just a review. The first number, remember, is called the dividend. The second number is called your divisor. To set it up, your dividend goes inside long division. Your divisor goes on the outside. Now, here is the key with dividing decimals. When you divide decimals, your divisor it has to be a whole number. All right? So your divisor has to be a whole number. If it's not, then you make it a whole number. Okay? So let me show you what I mean, okay? Let's say, for example, I want you to divide 50. Don't bite that, please. Thank you. Let's say I wanted you to divide these two numbers. 58.42 divided by 6.2. Well, we know from the image above, our divisor goes on the outside, dividend goes on the inside. So our setup is going to look like this. You write the word setup above. Okay? Now, here's the thing. Our divisor, 6.2, is not a whole number. It's a decimal right now. So what we need to do is make it a whole number. And we do that by moving our decimal place one place to the right. So that will make this a whole number. Okay? Now, since you moved the divisor decimal to the right one spot, we also have to move our dividend decimal to the right one spot as well. All right? So they go hand in hand. If you move one, you move the other, and it's to the right, and it's always going to be the same number of steps. Okay? Now, our problem will now turn into this. Okay? So now our problem turns into 584.2 divided by 62. And as soon as you move those decimal places, all you're going to do is copy it directly above into your quotient. Okay? From there, you just divide. That's it. So the steps to division are Move the divisor's decimal and the dividend's decimal to the right the same number of times. Place your decimal in the quotient and then divide. That's it. That's as hard as it gets. Okay? So, like I said, you move the decimal first, then you divide. Okay? So, we're going to start off with some pretty easy examples. We're going to do one or two easies, and then we'll progress where we got to start moving things. Okay? So here's our first example. All right, 370.4 divided by 8. Now, I set it up. Okay? And then I look at the number. I look at my divisor. My divisor is a whole number. So I'm okay. I don't have to move the decimal. So I'm going to copy the decimal directly above. And I no longer have to worry about the decimal. It's done. Now I just divide. 8 goes into 37 4 times. Drop down my 0. 8 goes into 50 6 times. Let me see here. What's that going to be? 10 minus 8 is 2. Drop down to 4. 8 goes into 24 3 times. All right? And that's it. That's it. So if you really take a step back and you really, really look at what I just did, other than placing a decimal point, nothing changed. Division is still the exact same method. It's just now you're going to have to go ahead and place a decimal. So directly to the right, we're going to do the very first problem that we looked at. And I want you to do it. So go ahead and divide 270 and 2/10 divided by 7. Okay, so let's go over this one together. First, let's set it up. 7 goes on the outside. I'm going to give myself a little bit more space. So I have 7 goes into 270.2. Now, do I have to worry about moving a decimal? Yes or no?
No.
No. Very good. That's key. So I write the decimal directly above. Now it's just a matter of just doing the math. 7 goes into 27 3 times. I get 21. That's going to be a 6. Drop down to 0. 7 goes into 60. What is that? Eight times. 56. Drop down to 2. 7 goes into 42 6 times. So we get 38.6. All right. Are there any questions? Like I said, dividing decimals is very straightforward, but you just got to follow your steps. All right. And here's our steps right here. All right. So to divide a decimal, step 1, you're going to move the decimal point in the divisor to the right until it's a whole number. The key, move to the right until you get a whole number. That's the key. Okay? Step 2, you're going to take the dividend and move it to the right the same number of places. And then step 3, you could basically sum up your answer, or you could sum up step 3 in one word: divide. All right? So now that we know these steps, and hopefully you're writing them down, now we're going to start dividing numbers where you actually have to move the decimal place. Okay? So I'll move this up here and I'll start writing down the next example. In my experience, I have found that students actually have more trouble with just dividing the numbers than they do with the decimal point. So you got to make sure that you take your time, make sure that you're thinking about every question, and you're thinking about every move. So the example, 166.88 divided by 5.6. So, like I said, I'm going to set this up. All right, now, my divisor is not a whole number. So step 1, I'm going to move my decimal place to the right until it is a whole number. So I move it one spot. Step 2, I move the decimal and the dividend the same number of times to the right. One spot. This is where I will rewrite my problem. And whenever I write that decimal, I automatically just put it directly above. Now I know my decimal place is done in terms of moving it. All I got to worry about now is just dividing, which is unfortunately the most difficult part. All right. So let's see here. 56 goes into 1. It doesn't. 56 does not go into 16. It doesn't. 56 goes into 166 2 times. Okay? That's going to be 112. Now I just subtract. 6 minus 2 is 4. 6 minus 1 is 5. 1 minus 1 is 0. Drop down the 8. Now, 56 goes into 548 9 times. So 9 times 56 is 504. Excuse me, subtract. I get a 4. I get a 4. Drop down the 8. And 56 goes into 548 8 times. So your quotient is 2.98. Does that make sense, everyone? Are there any questions? Are there any questions? Speak now or forever hold your peace. I think they say that at weddings. Has anybody ever been to a wedding where the wedding officiant said that and somebody spoke up and was like, "Don't get married"? I always want to attend a wedding like that just to see what would happen. All right, next one. All right, let's try this problem. We're going to divide 5.264 divided by 0.32. Okay? So, let's set it up. 0.32 goes outside. It's my divisor. 5.264 goes inside. Now, I need to move my decimal so that the divisor is a whole number. So I need to move it 2 places to the right. Which means in my dividend, I need to move it 2 places as well. So I'm just going to rewrite my problem as 32. And write 526 decimal directly above in the quotient. And then the last number is a 4. Now that the setup is done, the decimal is placed, all I got to do is divide. So 32 does not go into 5. 32 goes into 52 once. It's going to be a 32. Now I just subtract. 2 minus 2 is 0. 5 minus 3 is 2. Drop down my 6. 32 goes into 206 6 times. It's going to be 192. Once again, I subtract. That'll give me 14. Drop down the 4. 32 goes into 144 4 times. And that's going to be 128. 144 minus 128 is 16. Now, here is the first time where we're going to have to do something. And this new thing is, if you've run out of numbers, what you're going to want to do, especially when you're dividing, is add a 0. Now, you may be asking yourself, well, how did he know to do that? Well, if you look at what we have, okay, 32 and 16, I know 2 times 16 is 32. Does that make sense? So because there's that relationship right there, I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe there's more I can do. Another thing is, you got to remember that even though the number that we're dividing into, the dividend, is 500, I'm going to write it down here, but then I'm going to erase it. Even though this is the number that we're dividing into, theoretically, I could put an infinite amount of zeros off to the right, and it's still the same exact number. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a 0 and drop it down, okay? And we'll continuously do that until one of two, or is it one of two or one of three? Yeah, we'll continuously do this until we get one of 3 situations. The first situation is what we're going to have here. 32 goes into 160 exactly 5 times. So here's our first situation. If we write a 0 and then we get a remainder of 0, we know we're done. Okay? But then sometimes you may not get a remainder, or you'll get a remainder that's different from 0. And one of 2 things are going to happen. Either you're going to get the same remainder over and over again, which I'll show you that in a second, or you're going to get remainders where the numbers there's no pattern or anything, okay? For now, just insert a 0. Like, when in doubt, insert a 0. That's basically my $1,000 advice. When in doubt, put a 0, drop it down. Okay? Are there any questions? All right, good. I guess we're moving along smoothly. So I have a question for you, and that's this next example. And this comes up a lot. Let me write it like this. Round the quotient So we're going to do this problem right here. 17.5 divided by 0.48. And there's directions. I want you to round the quotient to the nearest hundredth. So before we even start this problem, I have a question for you. If I want to round to the nearest hundredth, how many decimal places do I need? Now remember, the way we set up our problem is just like this. And I know this answer up top, those numbers up top represent my quotient. How many decimal places do I need for me to round to the nearest hundredth? I think it's a pretty good question. Be careful now. So here's what we're gonna do, because the answer was, was that you, Savannah? I think.
Yes.
Savannah said, "Is it 2?" Now I'm gonna say, be careful. Here's why. We know decimal numbers have a whole number out front. Then it has the decimal part. And then you have the names of all your places. So that's the tenths. 2 places, Savannah, would give me the hundredths. But I have to round. And if you think about it, the way we round, and I'm going to use a different color now. The way that we round is we underline the place value that we want to round to, and we look to the right to determine if we round up or round down. So if the question says round to the nearest hundredth, I need 3 total decimal places. That third decimal place is going to help me round. Okay? So now that we know that, why don't you guys try this problem? All right? Divide the 2 numbers. I need 3 decimal places, and I want the answer in its rounded form. Okay, did anybody get an answer yet? Like a final result. Nobody yet? I'll let you work. Anybody stumped? All right. Who got an answer? Please help me. I'm dying. Robert, did you get anything? It's okay if you didn't. Just tell me.
36.4.
36.4?
Yeah.
So my question to you is, why did you round to the 10th position when I wanted you to round to the 100th position?
I just wasn't done.
Oh, you weren't done yet?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. We'll keep going then. Although, Robert, I really like what you have so far.
Is it 0.45?
Be careful.
Or 0.46?
There it is. 36.46. So let's go ahead. Let's go through this together. We'll see how to do this problem. First thing, I set it up. I note that I have to move the divisor by 2 decimal places, which means I got to move my dividend by 2. So I rewrite as 48, and it goes into 1750 with a decimal. Now remember, because you had to move it 2 places to the right, there's a little gap there, so fill it in with a 0. And now it's just a matter of just doing the problem. So 48 goes into, let's see, 1. It doesn't. 48 does not go into 17, but it will go into 175 3 times, right, Robert?
Yeah.
What did you get for underneath?
288. Or, well, 310, 288.
So you're subtracting 144, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I wanted to hear.
Okay.
That's all right. So you get 31 after you subtract, drop down to 0. 48 goes into 310 6 times. Robert, what's 6 times 48?
288.
288, thank you. So I subtract 310 minus 288 is 22. So now I need to add a 0, drop it down because I need 3 decimal places. So 48 goes into 220 4 times. I'm trying to do this in my head. What'd you get, Robert? 192, is that correct?
Yeah, 192.
All right. Now I subtract. I get 28. Drop down to 0. You should get a 5 here. Sorry. My head's moving too fast. 48 goes into 285 times. So that's going to be 240. Now I have my answer to the 100th position, but I need to round it. So I need one more. So this is going to be 40. Drop down to 0. 48 goes into 400 8 times. Now, if you want, you could stop right here. Some of us may go ahead and just do it a little bit more, and that's fine if you want, but you don't have to. All you really need to know is that number 5 or more? If it's 5 or more, your place value increases by 1. If it's 4 or less, everything stays the same. So, underline, look to the right. Robert, you are absolutely correct by saying 36.46. Are there any questions, people? All right, let's do the next one. Am I moving too fast? Are we okay? All right, so here's our next one. We're going to divide 272.356 by 28.4. Part A. So part A, part A, we're going to estimate just to get an idea of what our answer should be. Okay? And then part B, part B is to find the actual answer. And if we need to, round to the nearest hundredth. Okay? So, excuse me. Let's look at our problem. 272.356 divided by 280. Or I'm sorry, 28.4. I don't know why I said 280. 28.4. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to round each of these numbers to the nearest whole number. That's it. So like the 272.356. I'm just going to make that 270. I'm just going to make it easy on myself. That's all. And then the 28.4. I'm just going to round that to 30. So when I divide these two numbers, well, oh, why did I put a 0 there? 270 divided by 30. I wrote it as a fraction because they both ended in a 0, which means I can just cancel out the zeros. 27 divided by 3 is 9. So that just gives me an answer. I know that when I do this problem, I should get somewhere around 9 or maybe 8.5 or maybe 9.5, maybe 10, like somewhere around the number 9. If I get somewhere around the number 9, I feel really good about myself. So now let's actually find the real answer. Okay? So 28.4 goes into 272.356. I need to move the decimal to the right 1 spot. So I'll do it to my dividend 1 spot. And when I rewrite it, I just make sure that my decimal is in between the 3 and the 5. Now it's just a matter of just doing the math. Okay, now I will do this. So give me a second here. If I could spell, that would have been great. All right, so I'm just going to help us out here a little bit. So 284 times 8 is 2,272. I could definitely get closer. 284 times 9 is 2,556. That's as close as I'm going to get. In other words, 284 goes into 2,723 9 times. And that answer is going to be 2,556. Now I'm feeling pretty good because I already estimated my answer to be 9. And in the actual answer, the very first number I got was a 9. So I feel really confident about what I'm doing here. So when I subtract, I get 167. I drop down to 5. 284 goes into 1,675. 5 times. Five times 284 is 1,420. Now I just subtract. I get 225. Or I'm sorry, 255. Drop down to 6. And it just so happens that 284 goes into 2,556 exactly 9 times. So my estimated result was 9. My actual result is 9.59. So I feel really, really good about my answer. They're really close to each other. Okay, are there any questions? All right, all you got to be is careful. That's it. All right, as long as you're careful and you read the directions completely, this is pretty easy stuff. Okay? So now for the easy part of today's lecture. All right? We're going to be dividing decimals by powers of 10. Okay? So for example, let's say we wanted to divide 569.2 divided by 10. Okay? Well, if you wanted to, excuse me, you can go ahead and do this the old school way. All right? And the old school way is to write the 10 on the outside, 569.2 inside. Now the 10's a whole number, so I don't have to worry about anything. I just go ahead and just divide. 10 goes into 5. Well, it doesn't, but 10 will go into 56 5 times. That leaves me with 50. Now I subtract and drop down the next number. 10 goes into 69 6 times. I subtract. Don't forget to put your decimal in the quotient like I did. I forgot to do that. Drop down to 2. 10 goes into 92 9 times. When I subtract, I get a 2, so I need to put a 0 and drop it down. 10 goes into 20 twice. So you get 56.92. So that's the long way. There is a shortcut. All right? And the shortcut is it's actually very simple. And it's a rule that we've already learned. Like, you've already seen this rule before. It's just now we're doing with decimals. So here's our rule right here. So give me a second. It'll pop up on the screen here. There it is. So if we want to divide decimals by powers of 10, such as 10, 100, or 1,000, all you're going to do is you're going to move the decimal point of the dividend to the left the same number of places as there are zeros in the power of 10 itself. Okay? So, if that's the case, I'll write it like how we have it upstairs. There we go. So, if I have a factor of 10 as my divisor, such as 10, 100, 1,000, all I do, I count the number of zeros, and then I move my decimal place to the left the same number. And that's it. That's as hard as it gets right there. That's as hard as it gets. So let's go over a couple examples real quick of just using this rule. Like I said, it's very easy. So if I have 428.35 divided by 10,000, I count the number of zeros. And all I'm going to do is just rewrite the number. And I'm going to move my decimal to the left, the same number of zeros. So since I have 4 zeros, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I have to include a 0 in my answer now. Okay? I really don't know how to make that any more difficult, nor do I know how to make it any more easier. It's just a rule. So, are there any questions? Yes or no? All right. Well, that's good. That's good. We're done with chapter 5 then. So I will introduce you into the new stuff for chapter 6. This chapter, I think, is going to go pretty quick because it's, I don't want to say this here. I don't want to say it's easy because then, you know what I mean? Because then if somebody's, just not nice saying easy all the time. It's just you already know how to do all this stuff. It's just now we're going to look at a lot of application problems, a lot of word problems. So chapter 6, we're going to be talking about, well, if it lets me. Chapter 6 is ratios and proportions. Okay? Now, a ratio is the quotient of two numbers or two quantities. So what makes numbers and quantities different? Numbers are just numbers. Quantities usually have a unit associated with it. But at the end of the day, when you really think about this, if we're saying a ratio is the quotient of two numbers, then guess what? All it is a fraction. That's what a ratio is. It's nothing more than a fraction. Okay? Now, there are ways that we write ratios. I think the most recognizable way is the fact that ratios are fractions. So you would just write like A over B. But there are two other ways, and it all depends on the question. And it all depends on how you want to write it. Like really, it really does. The second way is by using the colon in between the two numbers. And then the third way is just writing the word 2 in between them. Regardless of which method you choose, they're all the same. 95% of the time, I'm going to be writing my ratios like a fraction. Okay? Now, ratios are everywhere. They really are. They're everywhere. If you've ever driven in a car, you are already dealing with ratios. So, for example, $65 miles per hour. Okay? This is a ratio. And this ratio is relating distance and time. So, if I really write this out, if I just show you exactly what I'm talking about, miles per hour. The word per means fraction bar. So what you're really saying is 65 over 1 hour. And there's our ratio right there. This is the comparison of two quantities. The top is in miles. The denominator, or the bottom, is in hours. Now, I'm going to put a big box around this because this one's important. Because the denominator is a 1, we call this a unit ratio. And the only reason why we call it a unit ratio, denominator is a 1. Okay? If you do a lot of baking, baking deals with a lot of ratios. Like 3 parts salt to 4 parts water. Let me write that down. In a certain recipe, so in a recipe, the ratio of salt to water is 3 to 4. So in other words, what you're telling me is 3 parts salt to 4 parts water. So it doesn't matter what measuring device you're using. It's just use 3 of those measuring devices for salt and then use the same measuring device and use 4 of them. So they could be like little teaspoons. These are my teaspoons here. Thank God you didn't sign up for an art class with me. But all this means is that if I'm going to use this teaspoon, I use three of them for salt and then 4 of them for water. If I use a measuring cup, Or a bucket. I can use a bucket. I just use 3 buckets full of salt and then 4 buckets full of water. That's why baking can be so easy yet so difficult for some people, because it is a science. Your measurements got to be perfect. Dominique, do you bake? Are you a good baker? I know you cook.
Yeah, I actually used to be a pastry chef for a while, so this is the part where it gets really hard for me, but I have to really focus on the 3 parts and 4 parts, or parts per part million. So
Yeah. Oh yeah. So did this example at least help a little bit then?
yes, it does, because usually I'm doing a whole bunch of math right then and there in the middle of trying to write out a recipe. But yes, it helps greatly.
So when I cook pizza, the recipe I use is nothing but ratios. And basically what I've done is I just made them percents. So no matter how much flour I start with, no matter how much, I know whatever that number is. 33% of that has to be water. 5% of that has to be yeast. 5% has to be salt. And then I think it's 13% has to be olive oil. What's ever left over is how much flour I use. So that's how all this works. It's just a matter of just how things are related to each other. That's it. So without going too much further into it, the only thing that I want you to be aware of right now is that a ratio is a quotient of 2 numbers or 2 quantities. I want you to know how to write it. And then if I give you like an example, like in a word problem, something like this. The ratio of, let me think about this for a second. All right. So later on today, this is why I'm thinking about it. Later on today, I have to cut my grass, which means I have to use my weed whacker. And it's all out of gas. Now, I have to mix the oil and the gas together. So in order for me to do that, the directions on the back, and I could run down and show you, but I'd have to run down into my garage and come all the way back up and show you the little container. So please just believe me right now, is for every little container of oil that I have, I need to mix that with 2.5 gallons every single time. So the ratio here is 2.5 gallons per 1 part oil. Now later on, what we're going to learn how to do is if I have 25 gallons of gas, how many of those little containers do I need? Now I know 2.5 gallons for 1 part oil. So we're actually going to create what we call a proportion to solve that problem. Okay? But we'll worry about that on Wednesday. All right? Are there any questions? Because I'm done for today.